I activate polymerization. You can't do that. That's my monster. Wait, what? Wait a minute. I have an idea. There is a long, salty history when speaking of superpolymerization. A card that was once feared by the hearts of many, superpolymerization, so lovingly referred to as Superpoly, was banned in January 2015, only to be resurrected on the September 2018 ban list to limited status, with Konami soon loosening their grip even further by putting it to semi-limited on the April 2019 ban list months later. Why is this card good? What utility does this card offer to a deck, and which decks benefit the most from this iconic Yu-Gi-Oh card? I've tried to answer these questions for myself, as well as you guys, in today's video. Welcome to Engine Evaluation, Superpolymerization. Before breaking down the utility of Superpoly, let us first look at the card itself. Superpolymerization is a quick play spell card that reads, discard one card, fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from either side of the field as fusion materials. Cards and effects cannot be activated in response to this card's activation. At the cost of one card being pitched from your hand, you not only are breaking your opponent's field presence, but bolstering your own in the process. This card allows you to fusion summon during either turn, uses an opponent's monster in a non-targeting, non-destructive manner, and to top it all off, is unable to be negated. This card holds a lot of power in its few lines of text. By looking at the reasons why Superpoly is run in a deck, I have compiled a list of 4 possible uses that Superpoly has for being in a deck, whether it is to counter a specific archetype you're facing, help a specific archetype you're using, help fend off against what you'll usually face in the meta, or when you use it for generic options for blind matches or spicy tech choices. The first use that Superpoly has is to counter a specific archetype. Archetypes usually share a common type or attribute among their monsters. Some even have fusion monsters themselves that could be used against them. For examples, Salamangrates are a fire Cyberse archetype. Not only would cards such as Diplexer Chimera, who take 2 Cyberse to make, be a viable Superpoly choice against them, but you could even play Salamangrate Violent Chimera, who specifically uses Salamangrates to make. As an aside, Violet wouldn't be the best option because Fusion of Fire can bring it out through the same method. It's just too niche to Salamangrates for it to ever be a generically good tech option. Other specific decks that come to mind when speaking on being weak to Superpoly are Cyber Dragons with CHIMERATECH Rampage Dragon, or Synchro decks due to Sea Monster of Theseus, and loads of prominently dark decks that we'll get to a little later. Another utility for Superpoly is to help out certain decks who have somewhat generic fusion materials. Archetypes such as Heroes, Invoked, and Shadal have 6 fusions who use one in-archetype card and any card of a specific attribute. In order to maximize Superpoly's target pool, you can add 1 copy of each of the 6 different attributes, or just run those attributes who you know you are most likely to face, such as Dark against Dangers or Fire against Salamangrates. Other archetypes, such as Metal Foes and Gem Knights, require different generic materials, such as Metal Foes requiring a Metal Foe and 1 monster with a certain amount of attack, or Gem Knights requiring a Gem Knight and a monster of a certain type. Being able to tech in extra deck cards you can summon yourself as well as with your opponent's monsters is definitely a good option and makes Superpoly especially viable in cases like these. In fact, there is so much synergy with certain decks that oftentimes only the Superpoly has to be added without any change to the extra, changing from a small engine to just a tech choice. A utility that I want to pay special focus on is Super Poly's reliance to what is being most played, which are usually the strongest or meta decks. In certain formats, Super Poly is a good addition to any deck because there are certain fusion monsters who have generic or generic enough fusion materials. For example, Starving Venom Fusion Dragon and Predaplant Dragostopalia are both good choices when a metagame has a lot of strong dark decks roaming around. Even against decks in formats where a U-Link is common strategy, cards like Guard Dragon Almaduke are potential choices that fit this meta countering aspect to Super Poly. Though this technically fits the bill for countering meta strategies, Super Polymerization can also be used to technically counter almost any strategy if you use the card MUDRAGON of the Swamp. Requiring 2 monsters with different attributes and types, if you're playing a deck different than your opponent, you can use one of your cards as well as one of your opponent's monsters to get rid of a troublesome obstacle, or if your opponent plays cards that have different types and attributes, then you can remove 2 of their monsters and gain advantage that way. Another spicy option of mine is that you could also run Cyber's Clock Dragon with Super Polymerization. If your opponent uses Link monsters, as many people do, and you happen to be running, or if you choose to run Clock Wyvern, you can bring this out with Super Polymerization and get a pretty good fusion monster in the process. It's also interesting to note that most of the time, dark monsters are quite powerful, and I know I've spoken of this earlier, but I just want to reiterate that most of the Predaplant fusions, or related to them, I'm looking at you, Venom, are really good targets for Super Polymerization. The actual implementation of Super Poly as an engine in a deck is pretty straightforward. At the time of making this video, you can only run up to 2 copies of the card, and to maximize efficiency, if this card has a major role in your deck strategy, you could even run another complementary engine known as the Predaplant engine. Depending on the deck, this engine may cost you as little as 1 extra deck slot, with some road decks not utilizing the extra deck except with Super Poly, often running 3 of every major monster that they think are good counters to decks they'll face. Since this engine is so small, if your deck doesn't already utilize fusion summoning, this would be a great option to run in the side deck if you realize it would benefit your matchup. Super Poly is an interesting card to say the least. I believe its fame, or infamy, is derived from the fact that it takes the classic summoning mechanic of fusion and flips it on its head in a way that invites strategy, creativity, and interaction with an opponent. Why is Super Poly useful? Because it's a unique card that adds a fun and competitive aspect to any deck capable of running it. You get a 9 out of 10, Super Poly. I expect great things from you. This has been JC Theater Yu-Gi-Oh's Engine Evaluation. See ya.